It's Monday, March 23rd. The Strait of Hormuz, accountable for 20% of the world's daily oil shipping volume, is still closed. More than 70% of oil from Hormuz goes to Asia. At this rate, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and the Philippines are estimated to run out of oil within 3 weeks. China has stopped exporting fuel to guard domestic inventories. But even if the strait reopens tomorrow, there is already long-term damage done to global energy supply. This morning, the head of the International Energy Agency said that at least 40 energy assets across 9 countries in the Middle East have been severely or very severely damaged since the Iran war began on February 28th. IEA executive director called the crisis equivalent to the 2 oil shocks of the 1970s and the 2022 gas crisis put together. The Strait of Hormuz remains at roughly 5% of normal shipping flow. The IEA has already released a record 400 million barrels from emergency stockpiles and barrels signal readiness for another release. Oil prices fell violently today after President Trump posted on Truth Social claiming very productive and good conversations with Iran. Iran has denied any such events, with state media saying no talks with the U.S. have taken place. Brent crude plunged from above $113 to below $100 in under an hour, erasing roughly $17 a barrel in one of the largest intraday swings on record. WTI is still around $89. Meanwhile, the S&P 500 and Dow Jones rallied sharply on the news, while gold fell to its lowest level of 2026, dropping below $4,300 as rising yields and a strong dollar crushed the traditional safe haven trade. Diesel futures are up 57% this month, the largest single month spike on record. And the historical correlation between diesel and CPI points towards inflation north of 8% coming up. Meanwhile, the entire semiconductor industry is also at risk from the Strait of Hormuz closure, as helium supply is disrupted. Helium is needed to transfer heat in semiconductor manufacturing and is critical in the process. According to estimates from the U.S. Geological Survey, Qatar makes 30% of the world's helium. Key semiconductor manufacturer countries rely on this choke point for access. In 2025, South Korea bought 55% of their helium from the Gulf Cooperation Council, while Taiwan bought 69% of its helium from the GCC. So is this shaping up to be one of the worst global supply chain disasters in history? Follow and subscribe for more daily updates. Our next guest will discuss with us how long the Strait of Hormuz will likely remain closed and where gas and diesel prices will head from here. Joining us now is Doomberg, head writer of the Doomberg substack. Welcome back to the show, Doomberg. Good to see you. What is going on?
So obviously, before Trump posted this morning, on Monday morning before market opened, that he had ordered, I guess, a 5-day reprieve. Some 36 hours earlier, he posted that he was giving Iran a 48-hour ultimatum. Otherwise, he would, quote, destroy their power plants and make the place basically unlivable. It's really hard to do analysis when you have such whiplash and when the whole world is looking at the president's Truth Social account. If we take this morning's post, there's only 2 real possibilities. What the president said is true, or what the president said is not true. So let's take both in order. The evidence that what the president said is true begins with the fact that he said it. He's the president of the United States. You would think that there would be some truth to it. And markets, as you have described in your question, have responded, at least initially, perhaps with the hope that what he posted is true. The evidence that it's not true is that Trump has posted many things that turned out to be not true in the past. And as you alluded to, Iran was pretty swift to deny it. And then the last piece of evidence was the conspicuous nature of the timing of the Truth Social post, which came, a couple hours before the market opened, which seems to be a recurring pattern with Trump. If the post is true, count us amongst those who are happy that negotiations are ongoing and that the war might soon end. And if it's not true, then we have big issues to ponder. So happy to take it in either direction.
Okay, let's take a look at this post in question. Are you referencing this one here? If Iran doesn't fully open without threat, the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours from this exact point in time, the United States of America will hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Yeah, he put that out Saturday.
2 days ago.
Yeah, Saturday, 4:44 p.m., according to the screen that I'm looking at. We found that a curious thing for the president to post. Some would use other descriptors for it. And then the post this morning, of course, which is the one that is driving markets, seems to have undid that threat, or at least put a 5-day pause on it. When we saw that post on Saturday, obviously it's hard to write in the era of Trump because you're one headline away from, crumpling up your paper. Yeah, that's the second post. We went back to a model that we're working on internally that we're probably going to publish next, and that comes down to what is the definition of winning a war. And in our view, a war is won when one side inflicts pain, more pain than the other side can tolerate. And so Trump's threat on Saturday is a threat to apply such pain. So the theory behind that post is that if the U.S., with Israel's help, destroys Iran's electricity grid, that will inflict enough pain that the war will be won. Iran will come to terms. They'll capitulate. The strait will be open, and off we go. But there's two parts to that definition. There's how much pain can you inflict and how much can the other side tolerate. And also then, how much pain can the other side impose on you and how much can you tolerate? And I think it's pretty clear that Trump is not ready to tolerate significant stock market declines in order to prosecute this war. And the timing of that post this morning is a hint to that effect. Trump does not want to see oil prices go higher, and Trump does not want to see stock prices go lower. Now, to serve the mission of, quote, removing Iran as a threat, taking care of their nuclear stuff, reopening the strait, Trump might be willing to take more pain, and he might be even willing to convince Americans that such pain is necessary, and Americans might even agree to sign up for such pain. But at the moment, it's pretty clear that the Iranians believe that they have found their point of maximum pain for Trump, which is to close the strait and threaten to destroy the Arab countries' oil and gas producing facilities and and Israel's desalination facilities and its power plants, which are much smaller and much easier to target. So here we are. Who has escalation dominance? This is the big question of the day.
Before we continue, I want to bring to your attention today's sponsor, Monetary Metals. Now, most people think of gold as something you buy and store. Monetary Metals takes a different approach. Instead of just holding gold and waiting for price appreciation, you can earn a yield on it paid in physical ounces. Through their leasing platform, investors can earn up to 4% annually with yield paid monthly in ounces. That means your return is measured in gold, not just in currency terms. Rather than sitting idle while you pay storage costs, your gold generates income. The metal remains your asset and can be redeemed at any time. Thousands of investors are already earning monthly interest in gold through Monetary Metals. Visit monetary-metals.com/Lynn, link in the description down below, or scan the QR code here to learn more. And also, where is the red line for both parties? What is a red line for Iran that Trump must not cross? And what is the red line for America's allies, particularly in the Middle East, that Iran must not cross? Desalination plants that Iran threatened to strike. If those were hit, it would leave millions of people without water.
Yep. So we wrote about desalination vulnerabilities all the way back in October of 2024, long before they were, the headlines that they are now. We wrote in the context of Israel's vulnerability, not assuming that Iran would go to war with the Arab Gulf states as well, which they have done. And the Arab Gulf states are even more vulnerable to desalination attacks than Israel. Now, to your question, Iran responded to Trump's 48-hour ultimatum by saying, if you attack our power plants, we will attack oil and gas production facilities across the Arab states and Israel's desalination plants and power grid. They made that threat. Can they follow through on that threat is the question. And I think the answer, based on the evidence, is yes. Look, 20 days into the war, last week, Israel, ostensibly acting without Trump's knowledge or approval, so the president says, attacked the South Pars gas field. And then Iran, in response, said, we're going to attack Qatar's Ras Laffan site. And within an hour or two of Israel's attack, 2 targeted missiles landed on the number 4 and number 6 trains of Ras Laffan's LNG export facility. And that shows a capability to take out decabillion-dollar oil and gas assets. The Middle East is a collection of very fragile light bulbs that are easy to break, that would cause huge pain on the West. The question is that pain that the West is willing to tolerate in order to win the war? And so Trump did not attack their power plants this morning, says that he has postponed it for 5 days. The Iranians say there are no negotiations ongoing, that this is fake news designed to manipulate the markets. And time will tell.
You wrote an interesting piece called Island Hopping, and this is from Doomberg's Substack. And I encourage everybody, if you haven't already, to check out Doomberg's Substack. Very informative reports on not just the energy markets, but global macro and geopolitics. Island hopping: does a path to China's control over Taipei run through Havana? Now, I want to skip ahead to the last paragraph that I can see here. If we are correct, World War III is about to take on a wholly more precarious dimension. Let's connect the dots before. Let's connect the dots weeks before they might dominate international affairs. And before that, you wrote, in our view, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese leader Xi Jinping are setting up a trap for U.S. President Donald Trump. What does this trap look like?
So first of all, David, I have to get you a comp subscription to Doomberg so we can unroll the rest. But
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So this is a bit of an off-the-wall piece that we like to write every once in a while. Right now, the United States is implementing what amounts to an embargo over Cuba. And very much below the headlines, Russia has 2 tankers steaming to break that blockade, filled with oil and refined products to help the island of Cuba and its beleaguered people. And then the question becomes, will Trump allow these Russian tankers to reach Cuba? It's a replay of the Cuban Missile Crisis without the missiles and without the press coverage. And so we thought, what is going on here? At the same time, China is reinstating its naval exercises around Taiwan and inside of Taiwan's international waters. And one wonders whether Putin is sending these tankers to break the American embargo on Cuba isn't a test, a precedent-setting test, so that let's imagine that the U.S. boards these tankers or stops them from going to Cuba. What's to stop China from taking advantage of the U.S. being distracted in the Middle East and imposing an embargo on Taiwan in an effort to reach what they would call reconciliation with Taiwan without firing a shot? And the clues that this might be going on are twofold. One, last week, China offered to Taiwan, hey, let's collaborate on energy. We know that you're an island. We know that you depended on the Middle East for oil and imports of LNG. You can lean on us and we'll supply everything you need. And Taiwan rejected that. And then the military exercises that I just described to you started up. In a world where it's perfectly fine for the President of the United States to embargo Cuba, what stops Xi Jinping from doing the same with Taiwan? And Taiwan is in a very precarious position. This is widely known. We wrote a piece called Indefensible 2 years ago. They rely on imports for essentially 100% of their hydrocarbons. And they only have 11 days of storage of natural gas. And they rely on natural gas to produce 40 to 45% of their electricity. So if China's Navy surrounds Taiwan and says, no LNG tankers should come here, if you're the captain of a floating bomb, are you gonna run that gauntlet to deliver your cargo to Taiwan? Of course you're not. We've seen that the mere threat of hostilities against cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz has led to the effective closure of the strait. And we believe China would be in a position to do that to Taiwan, and they just might if these Russian tankers are turned away. So we hope we're wrong, but it's a story that we wanted to put on people's radars because there are consequences to what the U.S. is doing. Trump has argued that might is right, that international law does not apply to him. As President of the United States, he defines what is legal and what is not legal, and that's fine. But you better have a pretty good appraisal of the might of your geopolitical opponents in that case. And China might be willing to just test that. And so we just wanted to put that on people's radar as a possibility to follow.
How is Russia benefiting from this entire situation, if they are at all?
Sure. Well, for one thing, the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, has relaxed sanctions on Russian oil and gas. Two, prices are elevated, which increases the profitability of those sales, depending on the nature of the contracts. And three, if the U.S. is bogged down in an extended war in the Middle East, in a scenario where munitions and in particular air defense munitions are in short supply, and the Middle East is becoming a priority. Because unlike the war in Ukraine, the U.S. is directly involved in the war in Iran, even though we think that's not much of a distinction. It necessarily means that there will be less than otherwise would be available to Ukraine. And so I think those are the three ways, at least in theory, it benefits Russia. There are ways in which, of course, this war hurts Russia. Iran is an ally of Russia, and seeing its ally militarily weakened and its offensive capabilities degraded is probably not in Russia's interest. And so it's a mixed bag, but if you ask me how does Russia benefit, those three ways that I outlined, I think, are the primary ones.
The notion that the Iran war is going to end very soon. Now, Trump has been saying that since day one, but it's been more than a month now. And Pete Hegseth hasn't actually issued an official timeline, not even a range. What is your view on how long this could last?
You know, that's a great question. I think it's been 3 weeks, not quite a month. But I'm sure if we came back in a week, it would still be going on. I honestly think that not enough weight is being given to what the other side is saying and what they're doing. And so, the phrase that we see is that it takes two to taco, right? Yes, Trump might eventually, Trump always chickens out, but the Iranians will open the strait when the Iranians decide to open the strait. And we think that it's pretty challenging to envision a plausible military scenario that fully opens the strait. You could take a few islands, you could take the shores, the Marines can go in. We don't doubt the capabilities of the Marines to do those things, but does that open the strait is the question. And the Iranians have been communicating, whether you believe them or not, it's what they're saying. It's an input into the analysis. They have been communicating that their objective is to continue the war for as long as it takes in order to send the message that attacking Iran again is too painful. What it takes for them to achieve that objective remains to be seen. They've laid out a series of terms, which of course are wholly unacceptable to the U.S. and would be dismissed out of hand. And so the longer they stick to those terms, and as long as they could take the pain that is being inflicted upon them, then the war continues. Whether it escalates is a different question. And I think whether it escalates depends on whether Israel and the U.S. take out power plants or Iranian desalination facilities, or vice versa if Iran does. It was very interesting on Saturday night. I was watching Twitter, and earlier Israel had attacked an Iranian nuclear facility, or at least close to one. And so Iran responded by launching these missiles, and one in particular hit Dimona and caused serious damage. Well, here we are 3 weeks into the war, and Iran can call it shot and deliver missiles that air defenses cannot fully intercept. And that is an escalation capability that is serious. And until all of Iran's launching capabilities are destroyed, it's hard to imagine how that risk isn't hanging out there. And And so who knows how it ends? I honestly think the war is going to go on for a very long time. And I hope that I'm wrong. I was very happy to see Trump's post, even if I didn't believe it. And I think the market was very happy to see Trump's post, even if it doesn't believe it. It's trying to signal to Trump that if you want higher stock prices and lower oil prices, then continue down this path.
Okay, let's talk about lower energy prices. LNG, gas at the pump, as well as diesel. We'll touch on all three. Trump threatened, like we mentioned earlier, to bomb Iran more, specifically their energy facilities, if the Strait of Hormuz were not open within 48 hours. It's been 48 hours. We're close to 48 hours. There's no opening in sight. And so that threat didn't work. What options do Trump and his allies now have, if Trump still has any allies in the region left, to reopen the Strait of Hormuz? Because ultimately, that will help alleviate some of the pressure. We could talk about other strategies as well.
Yeah, I honestly don't know what the options are other than coming to terms with the Iranians, and the Iranians are not presenting terms that are remotely acceptable to the president or to his allies or to the average American who doesn't necessarily see the day-to-day of what's going on in the war. I mean, Iran's terms for ending this war are pretty stiff. I'm not sure if you've seen them, but they include the U.S. abandoning its military bases in the Middle East. Well, that alone is a non-starter for the U.S. It's never going to do that, at least not willingly. So if Iran means it, then the war continues and victory will be imposed militarily by either side. And so in our view, look, the Strait of Hormuz is incredibly difficult to reopen militarily because all it takes is a few drones fired from great distance and the threat of more drones, underwater drones, in-the-air drones, artillery bombardment, long-range missiles. If you're an owner of an oil tanker, and you have the lives of the crew members, under your responsibility, are you going to say run that gauntlet? And so as long as Iran wants to close the strait, it can. So now you have two possibilities. You change the regime, or you come to terms with the existing one. Now, if you change the regime, who's to say that the regime that replaces the current one has enough control over Iran to open the strait? Because if you think about it logically, if Iran becomes another Libya or another Afghanistan or another Iraq, then there will be pockets within Iran that will never agree to open the strait. And if you don't have, a strong government in control of domestic issues, how does the strait reopen? And so we seem to be in this vice, this impossible vice, where the world needs that strait to open. Trump needs that strait to open. But the pathway to doing it is impossible. And so the strait won't reopen. And markets, look, I'm surprised that oil is at $89 today. You know that I'm long-term bearish on oil, that I think there's plenty of it. But if you had told us 6 months ago that there'd be a hot war with Iran, the Strait of Hormuz would be closed for 3 weeks and counting, attacks on Gulf oil and gas infrastructure would occur, I would have thought oil would be much, much higher than this.
Yeah, I think you said 200.
Well, I mean, but at least temporarily, it can't stay there. That's the thing. Like, it can print there, but it can't stay there because there's just not enough demand for oil at 200 to sustain it. But that's a whole different set of problems, which is, economic destruction, Great Reset. 130% debt to GDP becomes hard to refinance when GDP is contracting 5, 6, 7%. So nobody wants to go there. Trump doesn't want to go there, I assume. And so you have this intractable problem. Look, the war was started. We've long said one of the reasons why you should be very hesitant to start wars is they're very hard to stop. And so here we are. But I'm shocked at the complacency of the market. I understand why U.S. oil is $89, I suppose, because the U.S. is a net energy exporter. It's got a lot of oil that's released from the SPR. The government does not want the price of oil to go higher here, but why Brent is only sitting at 100 as we're talking is a real mystery.
Yeah, and by the way, for those wondering why the Navy isn't securing the Strait of Hormuz, they tried. This is from a few weeks ago. U.S. Navy tells shipping industry Hormuz escorts not possible for now. The U.S. Navy has refused nearly daily requests from the shipping industry for military escorts, citing the Strait of Hormuz as an Iranian kill box. So it's more difficult than some may seem. Now, the other issue is not just the Strait of Hormuz, but energy infrastructure is permanently damaged in the entire Gulf region. The head of the IEA, for example, made an astounding remark. He said that on Monday, at least 40 energy assets across 9 countries in the Middle East have been severely or very severely damaged. He said that this fallout from the war is equivalent to the 2 major oil crises of the 70s and the 2022 gas crisis put together. We know that South Pars was damaged. We know that Ras Laffan LNG facility in Qatar, which is the largest one in the world, was severely damaged. So how critical are these actual facilities? How actually critical are these facilities is my question. Yes.
Yeah, they're very critical. I would say this is a rare occasion where we agree with the head of the EIA, Mr. Birol. This is profoundly consequential. Ras Laffan alone supplies 20% of global LNG. Now, only 17% of the LNG trains were damaged significantly, but 20% is currently offline. And if the war ended tomorrow, if Trump's posts were true, it would take many months for that to normalize. In the long run, all of this will be repaired. There will be a huge amount of midstream activity, new pipelines built. We're pondering for our Doom Zoom, our pro tier at the end of this month here, a presentation called After Hormuz, Punctuated Equilibrium in the Energy Markets. We think the energy markets will probably split in 2, with a Western hemisphere and an Asian hemisphere. But right now, the crisis is very real. Europe exits the winter of 25-26 with empty stores, and LNG prices doubled since the war broke out. And that's assuming that there isn't, widespread further damage. Right now, I would say 40 facilities sounds like a lot, but there's probably 1,000 important facilities across the Middle East. Some are more important than others. The most important ones have not yet been hit. There are significant saltwater handling facilities that feed Saudi Arabia that are critical to keeping its oil field pressures high, that if those were taken out would be a real catastrophe. And then there's the escalation of the Houthis shutting down the Red Sea again, which has not yet happened, I think, to the surprise of many, including us. If the Houthis were to shut down the Red Sea again, you'd have a far bigger problem than we have now, because that east-west pipeline in Saudi Arabia would not be able to feed international markets in the way that it is doing now. And so we're at this weird spot, as we said several times, where everyone knows that the war can't go on, but the pathway out of it is not clear.
How long would it take, roughly, for either these facilities to be repaired or we reroute supply to other areas, if that's possible?
Yeah. If the war stops now, the industry would be incredibly resilient. And the industry is incredibly resilient. Look, even in the very worst case scenarios, where much of the oil and gas infrastructure in the Middle East is destroyed, 5 years from now, things will be back to normal. We would have a completely different financial structure, and who makes what oil and gas might be fundamentally altered. But the human endeavor won't be denied, which is a constant, unrelenting, increasing consumption of energy. And there'd be a huge amount of investor opportunity in the reconstruction. Look what happened in World War II, right? I mean, literally Japan and Germany were leveled. And within decades, they were both economic superpowers again. So there will be a rebirth. This too shall pass, assuming nuclear war doesn't break out and we make the whole planet unlivable, which let's just take that off the board as a possibility. Absent a full-blown nuclear exchange, that even escalates to, say, Russia and China getting involved. There will be, a rebirth when this war is done. Iraq, Saddam Hussein destroyed Kuwaiti oil fields, lit them all on fire. Remember those pictures back in the day of all the black sky and the firefighters trying to cap all those wells? It took some time, but Kuwait became a major oil producer again and is today.
There also is a diesel crisis right now. The government is considering, I'll show you this article, increasing the supply of diesel amid rising prices. Energy Secretary Chris Wright announced that the U.S. government is considering increasing diesel fuel availability in the market to combat rising prices. How are they going to do that? And how long ultimately do you think diesel prices will stay high? Because that ultimately impacts trucking, which impacts everything that we consume through trucking.
Yeah, so the U.S. is actually in a great spot. We wrote about this in a piece called Project Turtle. The real countries that have to concern themselves with this are island nations like Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan. The U.S. is in a great spot, but even here, there's an admission that there's only so much pain the U.S. government is going to tolerate imparting upon the consumers in the United States. So one thing that can happen, and nothing is officially true until it's been denied, but the U.S. is a major exporter of refined products, net, and it could just stop doing that. That would hurt the rest of the world in a big way. But China's already done it. China stopped the export of refined products, which is why you're seeing jet fuel shortages in Asia and Australia kind of panicking correctly. But the U.S. is home to some of the cheapest refined fuel prices in the world, and you have the Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, who, thank God, he's in the job, by the way, because he's one of the few people who actually understands the energy markets in government today. That the price of diesel today in the U.S. is too high, when it's the cheapest, amongst the cheapest in the world, tells you how little pain the U.S. is willing to absorb for this war.
Okay, Doomberg, what are the paths forward from here for investors? Do we stay long energy markets, or do you think your thesis for lower energy is going to start kicking in as more supply is released into the market? Keep in mind the IEA a couple of weeks ago and a week and a half ago said that its member countries are ready to release up to 400 million barrels of oil. I wonder if that's enough.
Well, that's just their member countries, and not included on that list is China with its 1.5 billion barrels of oil. The long-term real price of all commodities is lower. The long-term real price of oil will be lower from here, especially if the top is already in. But right now, gambling on energy markets is a bet on whether or not these critical infrastructure assets in the Middle East will be destroyed or not. And I don't know how anybody can have a firm bet in either direction given the information at hand. And so I think until there's more clarity on the war, standing pat is probably the most prudent move you can make. If you pushed us, we would say that the top is in, and that's mostly out of hope, not any analysis. But if the pre-market top of, the futures market top of Brent at 120 it ends up being the high price for this war, that's pretty remarkable, David, because that's not even nominally higher than where Brent got when Russia invaded Ukraine. And it's not nominally higher than what oil was in 2008 before the global financial crisis. So if you can't get $150 oil from this fact set, what fact set do you need to get $150 oil from here? And if you can't ever get to $150 oil from here, why do you want to own it? Mm-hmm. It's not going to go there. So anyway, that's all.
Also today, the stock market rallied. Like we mentioned earlier, the S&P's up about 1.5%. Are stocks going up because of the supposed productive talks between Trump and Iran, or are they going up because oil is coming down? Is there a direct reverse relationship right now?
I think they're the two sides of the same coin. Yeah, okay. I think Trump's post this morning drove both reactions, and gold, by the way. Gold recovering on that post as well from a pretty hard sell-off overnight. All of those things are related. And so again, back to like one of the earliest questions possible, like either that post is true or it's not. And if it's not true, which is not something that we've really talked about because nobody really wants to go there, but if the President of the United States made this up out of whole cloth, then what do investors do next?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, we could wait for major milestones before pulling the trigger on sell, buy, or hold. What milestones are you watching for in the next 6 weeks, let's say? Not so much milestones, but markers for news.
Sure. I mean, look, if the carriers leave the Middle East, it's kind of hard to prosecute a war if the carriers aren't there. If we see escalation, so if, for example, one desalination plant in Israel is blown up, I mean, that would be a huge escalation. And then you would be, does Israel escalate to the unthinkable? That's on the board as a possibility. Or if everyone says, okay, whoa, now we've gone too close to the abyss, let's have a legitimate ceasefire and a discussion of terms. Or if you see a uprising in Iran and the regime overthrown, it's not our base case, but it's certainly possible. That would be a milestone. But ultimately, in our view, the best trade is the one that's the most certain. And when this war is over and oil is at $70 and its implied volatility has collapsed, I think that's a pretty sure sign of the direction of travel going forward, which would be lower then.
Well, maybe another sign, I'm just speculating, is let's say Congress doesn't approve the $200 billion of additional funds needed. Can you comment on this? What are the chances this gets approved versus not approved?
Great call, David. I wish I'd thought of it in my answer because I was thinking about it this weekend when I went for a long walk. It is not clear to us that there is sufficient support within Congress to pass this. Having said that, that's an awful lot of, let's say, grift to be had, and an awful lot of, projects that you could cut ribbons on in your district. And if there's one thing that Congress has been shown to be susceptible to over time, it is the largesse of military industrial complex spending on this scale. I tell you what, $200 billion is a lot of money, David. I mean, just think about it. That's as much money as the U.S. lent or gave in support for the war in Ukraine over years. And we're 3 weeks into this war. And $200 billion is the price tag already. I mean, that's pretty. Now, of course, that's the price tag going forward to prosecute the war as the Secretary of War thinks he needs. But that's a huge price tag. Have we become numb to what $100 billion is? So yes, it's no sure thing to us that Congress will pass this, but history also teaches that Congress loves to appropriate.
And let me maybe just end on this note. The war cost apparently $11.3 billion in the first week alone, mostly on smart munitions. Americans are probably wondering how expensive this war is going to cost in total. It's already looking like the most expensive conflict ever on a per day basis. Where is this money coming from? What other sources of funding need to be diverted in order to fund this conflict, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of things you could do with $200 billion. You could build an awful lot of nuclear power plants, for example. And by the way, David, that's just money. Where is the rare earths going to come from? Where's the tungsten going to come from? Where are the magnets going to come from? It's not clear that just printing a lot of money, because that's what would have to happen here. There's no taxation policies that's going to raise that incremental $200 billion in the face of a federal budget deficit of 1.6 to 2 trillion already. But it's not clear to me that you can just print weapons, and China has a stranglehold over certain supply chains. So it makes one wonder, but $200 billion, David, I'm old enough to remember when $1 billion was a lot.
Okay, Doomberg, tell us where we can find your work and what you're working on right now.
Yeah, Doomberg.com is where you can find everything. And what I'm working on right now is two things. Our Doom Zoom called After Hormuz, the punctuated equilibrium in the energy markets. And then the next piece, if it gets through edit, is House of Pain on wars and winning them. And this is where we get into this concept of not only is it important to see how much pain you can inflict, but it's also important to measure how much pain can be tolerated by both sides, and using that as a lens to analyze where we are in the war with Iran. So David, great to see you. Glad we were able to make this happen. And hopefully the next time we talk, this whole affair will be behind us.
Hopefully, and hopefully this war ends sooner rather than later. Thanks for coming back. My audience has been asking for your return for quite some time, so I'm very glad that you're able to make it happen. do follow Doomberg. Links down below. We'll put the links in the description. So make sure to check out his Substack and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much, Doomberg. I appreciate your time. We'll see you next time.
You bet.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe.